special edition of Wrestling with the Future. Tonight, it's Mob Talk, my favorite kind of show. Dan, you know how I love Mob Talk.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got a good one tonight. You know, last time we did Mob Talk, we had George Anastasia with us, my buddy George. And we actually have a gentleman tonight who knows George. And he is my new best friend, my partner in crime, not literally. Yeah, just in case the cops are listening. His name is Nick Christophers, and he is a player. And I want to tell you something, brother. He is a player in this world because he transcends at least 3 or 4 different genres of mob. And we're going to talk about the mafia and the mob, and there are some distinctions that are made between the two. But we're going to talk about them tonight. But before I do, Daniel, let me introduce our special guest. His name is Nick Christophers, and for the last 25 years, Nick has immersed himself in the field of mafia and mob-related writing and authorship, cranking out one bestseller after another, including Destinies II, No Honor Among Thieves, Prison Rules, Mafia Ties, and he also did a stint as the editor of Mob Candy magazine. He also received the prestigious Literary Achievement Award for exceptional reporting from the leader in Greek internet radio, Aktina FM. He was recently featured on the Reelz TV documentary series, Mafia Killers, with Colin McLaren, and that, my friend, is how I discovered this gem called Nick Christophers. Nick, how you doing, brother? Welcome to the show.
I'm all right, brother. Thank you very much.
You are quite welcome. You know, Nick, when you and I had a kind of lengthy conversation the first time we talked, we know a few of the same characters, it seems. You grew up, you know, like a lot of people do, you know, in a big city, in an area where there were, you know, so we'll call them wise guys. There were a lot of wise guys in, you know, some Italian, some Greek, some Irish, some Russian, depending on where you lived. And for better or worse, they all served a purpose. When did you realize that the guys you were hanging with were different? And that they were not like the other guys in the neighborhood. What was the tip off?
Well, my first actual honest experience is my father had a cafe, like most Greeks, and a lot of guys used to come into my restaurant, into the cafe, and I was 12 years old at the time. So, you know, I didn't really realize what kind of guys they were at first. They were very friendly, extremely generous, throwing money like freaking like it was water.
Yeah.
But my real honest touch with that kind of lifestyle, I guess street life, I guess you can call it. When I was in junior high school, I was bullied. I was jumped every day. Back up. Elementary school. I was beat up every day. So I said, when I got to junior high school, I met a kid, another fellow Greek, who happened to be the leader of the gang in the school. So I decided, you know, get initiated. I joined him.
There you go.
And every guy that picked on me in elementary school, I started a fight with him in junior high. And I got suspended like 5 times. Yeah. So that was my real first taste of, you know, gang related, I guess, experience.
Yeah.
And then on top of watching guys come into my dad's place, it was like a fusion of the two. And, you know, I started going down that, I guess you could say, wrong path.
Yeah.
You know, and I learned my lesson, got arrested, blah, blah, blah. I've been through a lot of that. So I had a kind of somewhat firsthand experience, I guess you can say.
That's, you know what? It's interesting, Nick. And Dan, once again, Daniel, young squire, you're going to learn something. How many times have I said on this show that so often the guests we have mirror my life? Because my father, too, owned a restaurant, an Italian restaurant. And my father, too, had these characters come in on a daily basis. It's funny, Nick, because they never paid for a meal, but they had plenty of money in their pocket to do so. It's interesting also that whenever my dad needed help with anything, they were always there. They never forgot that free meal. You know, and I grew up in Philadelphia. Of course, you grew up in New York.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about some of the guys you knew. So some of them were very well known among circles. We're going to talk about a few of those guys tonight. So Daniel, you being the the sheltered kid here, let's have your insight on this. You got one of the foremost mob writers in the country with you. Ask away. Talk to Nick.
Well, my first question is going to be out of morbid curiosity, something that Angelo and I had a good time talking about on the previous show. Something because we specifically with the Sicilian and the Italian mob, and being Italian myself, and obviously as a couple of Goombas that have come in and out of the show, your work's focused on the Greek mob, and you mentioned obviously in Prison Rules where you work. I'm curious if you noticed a difference in the, for lack of a better word, the social tones. Like the Italian mob was always, everybody had a nickname, everybody had a catch, Nicky, little, where the Greek mob doesn't seem to have that same narrative. I was wondering if you could kind of compare and contrast the social structures there.
Yeah, Nick, I think what Dan is asking is, does the Greek mob have their version of Fat Tony and Little Nicky and Skinny Joey?
Yes, actually they do.
There you go.
Yeah, they had Little Spiro. They had Teddy the General. They had what do you call it? Was the other guy's name? They had Fat Jimmy. I mean, they did have.
Let me ask you. One of the reasons that it's so prominent in the Sicilian mob and the Italian mob is because if you have 100 Italians in a room, 75 of them are probably some derivative of Tony. Is there a Greek name like that pops up all the time when you're talking about Greek mob?
Yeah, mine, Nicky.
Yeah. Or here's another one. Nicky or Gus?
Actually, more so. Yeah, Gus, yeah, but more like a Jimmy's very popular. Jimmy, Spiro, those kind of names are pretty dominant.
Nick, do you know how many diner owners I know named Gus?
Forget about it. There's probably a bunch.
12 diners, and they're all run by Gus, Nicky, and Joey.
Exactly. Here in Virginia, my favorite Greek / spaghetti restaurant is Gus's.
Oh, there you go.
It's a Greek Italian hybrid.
So now, Nick, I discovered you, and I'm going to take credit for it. I discovered you.
Yeah, Dad is Star Wars. He's not going to watch me.
Exactly, right? On the Reelz, the documentary series, they were talking about a particular guy that you knew quite well. They called him Gas Pipe.
Oh, Anthony.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Tony Gas Pipe.
Well, Anthony. Gas Pipe he was a character, very, very tough guy, the most paranoid guy you'll ever know. He became extremely paranoid. That's why he whacked one guy after another. That whole crime family, actually, getting back to what Dan was talking about, the Greeks were under the Lucchese flag. And Spiro, who was the boss of the Greek crew, he answered to Gas Pipe. Well, not really Gas Pipe, but the captain under Gas Pipe, the Fat Pete.
Yeah.
He answered to him. So that was a very.
It's interesting that you say that, Nick, and I'm going to go right there with you. It's interesting that you say that because when we had George Anastasia on the show, and Dan and I talked to George at some length about this, it's funny because George said that the guy you described, Gas Pipe, there was a guy in Philly just like him named Little Nicky Scarfo.
Scarfo, yeah. He's a psycho.
Little Nicky, yeah, complete sociopath, completely. But so paranoid that, I mean, Dan, tell me if I'm BSing here.
No, you're not.
21 of his crew. He had a crew of 40 and whacked half of them. It's crazy. It's crazy.
He was an extremely paranoid guy. He had a Napoleon complex because he was short. He's a short little guy. Dan could probably kick it if he fall down. But Nicky actually in Philly, when he came to power, the Greek mob in Philly, which was run by Harry Petros and Steve Budas, Scarfo put a tax on them. He wanted to tax them more. In other words, hit them up for more kickback money than they were paying before to Angelo Bruno. Yeah. And the Greeks said, get the fuck out of here. I'm not paying you shit.
Exactly, yeah.
That didn't work out well because they both got whacked.
Yeah, and that's a part of our history. A lot of people seem to, for whatever reason, Nick, they brush by that one. Why is that? Why is that not talked about more?
Well, because the Greeks in general, the Greek mob in general, and the Greek the guys in that clique, they're so much under the radar. They've always been that way. Not to say anything bad about Italians, because I love Italian people, but the Italian guys were a little more flamboyant. You
got a point, Dan. Nick says flamboyant. Let's see if we remember anybody. Say John Gotti, Phil Leonetti.
Yeah, there were definitely
Testa, Sal Testa, Angelo Bruno.
Speaking of
Skinny Joey Merlino.
You mentioned Gas Pipe. Correct me if I'm wrong. He came up in our conversation. Wasn't he the one who confessed to murdering Frankie D during that beef? Frankie DeCiccio, or however his name is pronounced.
Oh yes.
Yeah, he did, right, Nick?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Frankie D was another one that was always in, like, loved the big cigars and the spotlight and everything. Not to the way that Gotti did, but he was another one that you could find, the typical Don picture, or not Don, but the typical mafia pictures of.
And that's a really good segue, Dan. That's a really good segue. I'm going to bounce it back to you in just a second. But Nick, you have quite a bit of amazing work under your belt. Which came first, the love of the literary or the practical experience to have to put this down on paper? Which came first? Was it that love of writing, or did you have to find a way to vent this livelihood? I'm going to say livelihood, but did you have to find a way to vent your life into a more coherent?
Well, I love writing since I was a kid. I've always was a writer. But when it came to this subject area, to tell the truth, when I was in junior high school, when I joined that gang, there's a book I read that really inspired me to really write about this kind of a subject. And you guys probably know the book. It's called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, that book I loved that book a lot because we were made to read it in junior high. That was one of the requirements. So when I read that book, I felt very much attached to the main character and what he was going through. And I, identified with it. And then just from my own what I was going through to begin with, that connected to me. Then, I found a way to vent, like you said, like Angelo said. I wouldn't call it venting so much, but I vented in a different way, which is using my hands, which wasn't very good.
Good, Dan.
Well, speaking of venting and talking, if I can, prison rules. Having been a corrections officer before, I've read that. It reads like a dictation, and I mean that not as a criticism, but it literally reads like someone is just sitting down telling you a long story. There's some of the thoughts bounce around, some of the narrative bounces around. Did you do that on purpose? You talk about how you just wanted to vent, where you just kind of sat down and told the story and told with obviously your influence. did you intend to make it such a read, which made it so interesting, is that it read like literally someone just hit record on a tape recorder and started listening to a story.
Yeah, and Dan, that's exactly where I was going when I was talking to Nick about that before. You know, just like Dan said, did you have to do it?
Well, actually, to answer Dan's
choice in it.
Well, to answer Dan's question, Prison Rules actually was the brainchild of John Elite. John Elite was John Gotti Jr.'s ex-bodyguard.
Mm-hmm.
So me and John got together, and we decided, because I knew John, and me and John got together, and he had this idea where he wanted to teach, put a book out, a how-to book, how to survive in prison, kind of a book, where it was really meant for young people, young men and women, to read it, to scare them straight, was to go the right path rather than, go the way where they end up in prison. So it was John. The book was, I wrote it through John's eyes. That's the way it was done.
Interesting. Now, Nick, I was going to say right where you are. George Anastasia, we had him on. We talked about his book called Gotti's Rules.
Gotti's Rules. Yeah.
Okay. Now, an interesting perspective that you're writing through John's eyes, and here this book is being written from the third eye, kind of like the outside looking in. And it raised a lot of eyebrows because of the kind of person that John A. Light is. He has been called a con man, a bullshitter, a guy who thinks highly of himself, a guy looking for his 15 minutes. I don't know the man. I've never met him. Dan and I would love to have him on the show at some point to really just talk to him and pick his brain. But that's one of the things that came up when George Anastasia was here. He wrote that book with John A. Light, and he got a lot of, the flood of backlash, Nick, that came from Gotti Jr. Well, you're laughing because you know where I'm going. I
got it also.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Dan. Pick up on that.
Well, you could not have been more right. If there's anybody who's come up in conversation in the last handful of episodes we've done that we would want on the show, it's him. And I'm curious. He obviously, when his name came up before, he was the talker. How did you? Because I couldn't find much information on that. How did you come about working with John Elite? Like, who about that story?
Well, I knew John through another friend of mine, a mutual friend, and it just so happened that when me and John started talking, like when me and Angela was talking, that me and John had a lot of familiar friends that I grew up with, that he knew, that I knew. And that's how we kind of connected. Now, I just want to make a comment on what Angela was saying, that I don't care what people say. I've hung out with him. I know John well. He's a very genuine guy. He's a good guy. He means what he says. He does want to help people, and that's what he's trying to do. John Jr., on the other hand, who he's had an issue with, who he doesn't have any issues with anymore, because my John doesn't really care anymore. But John Jr., in my eyes, hasn't really done anything for the youth or try to help anybody, help these kids to get off the street. John A. Light has done that and is still doing it to this day. So that tells me he's a guy who, was a bad guy. He beat people, shot people. God knows what else he did. He was in prison 16 different years. And he comes off prison and
Nick, you just said something critical. Talking about the Gotti Jr. And we've addressed this subject before, but not ever to this degree, and I'm going to go there. John Gotti Jr. is doing something today, Nick, that's unheard of for a reputed mobster to do. And it might be lost on the youth, but I have to tell you that what he's doing is litigating, and that's unheard of for a purported mobster to go to court and litigate against anyone. The ramifications of that are nothing short of staggering should he open up this plethora of skeletons in his closet. You know, aren't you like inviting that attention? What are your thoughts on that, Nick?
I don't know what he's doing, litigation. He's not a lawyer, so I don't know what the hell he's doing there. But John, you gotta remember,
He's
John
suing
Jr.
everybody is what he's doing.
I don't know what the hell he's doing. But John Jr., you know, I don't hate the man. I have nothing. I'm not crazy about him, but I don't hate the man. But you know, him litigating is pretty freaking funny. But because when you say about skeleton in his closet, John Jr. used to hang out at the same nightclubs I used to go to, and I saw him once or twice at the clubs or whatever. But you know, John Jr. is not a mobster. He never was he never was for that life. You know, it wasn't meant for him. You know, in reality, his father wanted him there, and he tried to live up to his father's aspirations, but he just wasn't. You know, some people are just not cut out for it, and John Jr. definitely wasn't. And
you know what, Nick? That's a really great point, and I think Dan's going to have a field day with this one. But let's talk about exactly what you're talking about. The second generation. A lot of them aren't cut out. They're not as tough as the old man. They're not as seasoned as the old man. We've seen it in Philadelphia with Testa Senior and Junior. We've seen it with, God knows, with any number of the Stanfa crew, John Stanfa and his son Joey Stanfa. There are a lot of people who I don't know if they feel like they have to, or they've got a reputation to live up to, or they're coerced by peer pressure to join. But that's one of the things that we really didn't get a chance to talk about before, Dan, and then maybe you and Nick can expand on that subject matter. The offspring of the mob characters, guys like Gotti Jr. and Michael Francis and people like that. Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, something that comes up on this show all the time, Nick, because we have a lot of seasoned veterans and a lot of older guests, and you always hear the story of how the current kids today are soft and weak, and social media and TV are making these mamby-pambies, and, you know, everybody's offended by everything, and snowflakes and safe spaces and all that shit. I'm wondering, has in your experience and research, because seeing numbers now, they talk about some of the crime families have membership as high as 200 made members, a lot of them under the age of 40. Are you seeing some of the younger guys suffering from the same thing the current young generation is, where they're more sensitive, more easily offended, more bothered by the simplest things, the microaggressions and all this shit that would have gotten people shot 30 years ago?
Well, you know, right now, to be honest with you, I'm not sure where Dan got that information from, but he might be correct. I'm not going to tell you definitely, but as far as I know, most of these families have decreased in number. Like the Bonanos have like 100 members, when before they had a heck of a lot more. The lack of a better term, the talent pool is kind of like, it's more like a cesspool than a talent pool. There's really nothing
I love it
there. And in Philly specifically, they've been recruiting a lot of Sicilians from Sicily, because they haven't got the talent pool anymore. The young guys don't have the cojones that the old guys did. And
exactly. And that's exactly, and you went right there, Nick. You went right there. There was a time, and I think it shows just exactly what you said. The numbers are dwindling. You know, when we had, oh God, who was with us, Dan? We had the George, and who else was? Matt Granahan was with us. A famous boxing MMA promoter who grew up with a lot of these characters. And one of the things that we talked about on that show is how do we say it, Dan? There was a time that if you looked at somebody wrong, you know, just looking at somebody could get you killed.
Oh yeah, they were talking about, you know, you be just the wrong facial expression. You mentioned, Nick mentioned earlier, the clubs. The wrong facial expression could get somebody beat badly, or, you know, or killed. And nowadays people are in tears because I have the wrong symbol on my T-shirt. So I'm wondering if, you know, I'm wondering if Nick mentioned bringing in the Sicilians. Nick, if you don't mind me asking, sure. Is this bringing in a I hate to describe it this way, but is this these younger, softer people? Is this a kinder, gentler mafia, or is this one of those where eventually Americans are going to kind of be taken out of the equation because they're going to have to bring in people from countries that actually have a spine?
Well, the scary part of that, Dan, is that a lot of the families now, there's nobody getting whacked. By the way, that's not happening no more. There's no killings going on. There's no beat downs in the middle of the street. Yeah. All those things are gone. They're very much under the radar right now. They went underground. And the guys that are coming from overseas and are the Sicilians, the Negrata, the Camorra, mostly in Canada. And what they are doing is they're hiring, lack of a better term, getting guys from other families to do their dirty work. You know,
exactly.
Black African-American gang, tough guys, Albanians, Russians, things like that, to do their dirty work, to distance themselves so they can't.
Yeah, and Nick brings up a good point. Dan, Nick brings up a good point. What they're doing, for all intents and purposes, they're subcontracting their work.
Which never happened before.
Yeah, they're contracting it out, really, to the highest bidder. The other thing that you're seeing now that would never have happened before is, again, Nick mentioned the Albanians, the Greek, it was very exclusive to one nationality. Now you've got a lot of crossover. The Italians and the Greeks, the Irish and the Russians. Mm-hmm. God, that's a show all by itself, Nick, for crying out loud. But let's talk about, there's always been this, and we should tell people, in the interest of full disclosure, although I claim Nick Christophers as a paisan of mine, Nick is actually Greek, but we still accept him anyway. So, and when I look at you, I want to go oompa. But here's the thing, though. There's always been this connection and this a working relationship between the Italians and the Greeks. Was that by design or was that by necessity, Nick?
Well, the Greek, whether it's in Philadelphia or whether it was in Chicago or New York, where the Greeks predominantly dominated, it was by necessity. Like the Italian, of course, the mob, the traditional mob, was not going to let some other crew do whatever they want and without kicking up a little bit of a tribute every month. So same thing in Philly. Harry and Steve used to kick up to Angelo Bruno. In New York, Spiro kicked up to the Lucchese's. In Chicago, it was up to the Outfit. So it was by necessity, but the Greeks weren't like guys you could just, like, lack of a better term, fuck around with, because they push back, believe it or not. And
well, yeah, I was going to say, you were talking about kickbacks and working. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can look it up if we need to. I could have sworn it was in a trial of one of the members of the Colombo family, where a lot of the evidence involved dealings with the East Coast Bloods, which would have been unheard of in the generation you're talking about. Exactly. You know, where they were basically recruiting what's the word, slingers from the Bloods to do some of the work they needed, and the older Italians were keeping their hands clean. And
yeah,
I
that actually
think
happened recently.
well, I was going to say, yeah, because I mean that was mid to late '90s, I believe. But that kind of got me thinking. You were talking about the kickbacks and the workups and all that. One thing, and it comes up a lot, and it came up in our talk on the Italians, is the way Hollywood glamorizes the mob. Is there ever been instances where you've had, say, the Greeks and the Jewish mob and the Italians and Irish, this scene that's in every movie that involves organized crime, where there's a bunch of people sitting in a room, the Irish are going to take this corner and the Jews are going to take this corner and the Russians are going to take, has anything like that ever happened? Or is that just one of those things like how defibrillators work that Hollywood just always gets wrong?
Well, Hollywood gets a lot of things wrong. I mean, it's funny you say that, Dan, but movies like I don't want to veer off too much, but movies like Goodfellas, Donnie Brasco, Casino, I can rip those movies apart because there's so wrong.
Nick, I gotta tell you, brother, I'm gonna tell you something. You're gonna love this. And Dan, did we or did we not do about 45 minutes just on television and film?
Mm-hmm.
Where the mob was represented. I'm going to tell you, Nick, we had, of course, we had to pay, we had to pay homage to Hollywood, of course, because everybody loved Goodfellas, The Godfather, Donnie Brasco. How could you not, right? Because it's great entertainment. However, Hollywood, as we know, plays great liberty with those parts.
That's another.
Oh yeah, I mean, but the truth of the matter is, real life isn't that dramatic. It's sobering, but it's not that dramatic.
Right.
And sobering is as far as I'm concerned, is a lot harder to deal with than drama. I can deal with drama, but some people will have a hard time dealing with the realities of seeing somebody get their head blown off in front of them. That's a stark reality that exists in that world. But we investigated the veracity and the authenticity of some of these movies, like Goodfellas, Donnie Brasco, The Godfather, the 5 Points Gang. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, we talked about especially one of the things was the popularity of The Sopranos actually led to, I don't want to say recruitment, but you had teenagers, Jersey, Philly, New York boys watching The Sopranos, trying to get into some of the local, getting in with some of the families because they thought that's what being in the mob would be like. And it's almost like you hear the stories about all the guys who applied for the Navy when Top Gun came out. It's the same mentality. People see Goodfellas and they think, I want to do
truth. That. Yeah, Nick, it's true. What Dan's telling you, Nick, is absolutely true. There are people who believe that the mob, the Italian mob, used the Sopranos as a recruiting tool. Is basically what he's saying.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty scary if that was the case, but
it's frightening.
The Sopranos.
It
was a great show. I met the cast many times. I love the show. I love Dave Chase, but it's not really the way it is. Because if a mob boss was ever known to go to a fucking psychiatrist, I don't think he'd last first of that week. I think he'd be gone.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the books that you've got. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, the Destinies books, 1 and 2. Prison Rules, of course, the John A. Light story. And Mafia Ties. I want to talk to you about the first book, the Destinies book.
Okay.
First of all, the title is intriguing. It's an interesting title. But the subject matter is equally interesting. You have this woman who finds herself immersed in this world of kind of shady characters, but she's at the same time drawn to it, but offended by it. but she can't pull herself away.
Mhm.
Talk to me about the fiction of it and the reality of it. Let's go there.
Well, the book Destinies, the title is basically it means the destiny of three different individuals that are in the book. The woman that you just mentioned, Nina, who's the main character, Santo, who's the mob boss that soldier at the time that she meets, and then their son, which comes later on in the book. So it's based on the destiny of these three characters and how each one of their paths play on each other. So the realistic part of it, as you mentioned, Angelo, is it's a little bit about some things I experienced growing up. Santo would be, the Vicarina, who was the boss of the Colombo family at the time, used to come to my dad's place. Guys like him who I met, and I kind of molded Santo into that kind of image. Anita is kind of like one of my ex-girlfriends. Don't want to mention the name right now.
Okay. We'll keep you out of court.
Yeah, I kind of based it on her a little bit, and the character Tommy is sort of like I forgot the character's name. It was from a movie, and he played an attorney, and I was going against the mob. But I can't remember the name of the character off the top of my head. So I kind of like meshed all those three together and kind of came up with, the book.
Dan, you had when I told you that Nick was going to be on new. So talk to me about your knowledge of the books, Dan.
Well, I had, like I said, I had read, excuse me, I had read Prison Rules about, I guess, I don't know, a year or two ago, maybe, having been a former corrections officer. It came up in the reading list around the same time another book that was written by an officer from the prison I worked at. I knew Destinies because it pops up it's comes recommended with you and the anytime, obviously with Amazon, like, hey, you read this book, we recommend Destinies, which, by the way, both Destinies books are 5-star ratings, which is unheard of for an author to have multiple 5-star books in the same series. That's not the tween fantasy crap that everyone's writing today.
Well, Dan, let me explain something to you, Daniel. Okay, you just know this. I only get the best on this show. Okay, so let's just understand that.
Well, I guess
nobody under a 4-star comes on this show.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
Well, it's funny. Angelo touched on it, and you got into it. Obviously, we do a lot of, and we started as a wrestling podcast. One of the things that comes up in our wrestling discussions is the idea of kayfabe, the real you, the best characters, or the real you turned up to 11. Some of the characters, be it the way you describe like Brooklyn and Detective Morris, I believe his name was.
Yeah.
There's no way you write a character that well without knowing someone who that's based on. I'm curious if you could.
That has to be real, Nick.
And you touched on that. I was wondering if you could expand a little more on where the line blurs between fiction and you're actually telling a story. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, Dan. You're pressing on a very heavy line there.
Tell him, Nick.
Well, Detective Morris. See, a lot of guys used to come into besides wise guys, a lot of officers used to come into my dad's cafe. A lot of attorneys, district attorneys, all those kind of guys would come in there all the time. Sometimes they would sit right across from each other, wise guys and cops on the other side. It was really weird. And it happened a lot, but they respected each other, Detective Morris, believe it or not, and I know you might laugh at this one, but I kind of thought of Detective Morris as Rudy Giuliani.
Really?
Oh, get for real.
Yeah.
You based him on Rudy. Interesting.
I assume you based him on young attorney Rudy and not crazy the way he's been, touching himself at Borat Rudy.
You know
forget
what,
that
Dan?
part.
That's an interesting point, Dan. Because and again, Nick, again, you can't make this stuff up. Dan will tell you, and I've talked about it on the show before, so I'm not making this up. My father bought a bar in Camden, New Jersey, from Buddy Rogers, the professional wrestler. On one side of the bar, you had all the Philadelphia mob on one side. On the other side, you had the Camden Police Department. Behind the bar, you had an ex-con and a former cop. I've never seen an interaction with, I just say it the way it is, with cops and fucking criminals the way these guys loved each other. They really did. They broke each other's balls. They poked fun of each other, but when it came down to it, they had this mutual, like a bond almost, like a fraternity, because each group in and of themselves are exactly alike. As different as a police officer is from a criminal, 5 criminals are exactly the same, and so are 5 cops. You see where I'm going with that?
Well,
Go ahead, Nick.
It's funny you said it. Sorry, Dan.
No, you're fine.
The funny thing is that if you think about it, stop and think about it. What does an officer do every day? An officer, who I respect, policemen, they have a job to do, right? So they're out there. They might have to bust a couple of heads, straighten some things out, all right? Pretty much, right? And they walk with a bit of a toughness, and they have a uniform on, so they represent the color blue, the blue bloods. Mm-hmm. So then you have the wise guy who's also wearing a nice suit, uniform. He's got to bust a couple of heads sometimes. So there's a very thin line between the two. And one thing is, every wise guy I was talking to, friends of mine I've known and friends I still have today, they respect cops, believe it or not. And there's one guy I'm actually working on a 5th book with. His name is Bill Catolo Jr. He was Wild Bill Catolo's son in the Colombo family. And Bill Jr. told me that his father, when he was on the street, before he was killed, his father always told him, Bill, if an officer ever comes to you, FBI agent, anything, you show them respect. Don't act like a jerk. Don't have a wise mouth.
Yeah.
They have a job to do as well. And
absolutely,
a lot of the old timers had that same mentality.
And that's the one thing you saw that in the crew as it existed under the man they called the Gentle Don, Angelo Bruno. Yeah. Bruno was an interesting guy, especially for he looked like somebody's grandfather, but here's a guy who's the head of a mafia family. And Dan and I talked about this before. We had his before and after picture up on our screen. Now here he's wearing his little fedora cap,
like Dad is wearing.
Yeah, walking around with his sweater, and then the next picture he's looking like like with the blood all over and his mouth is open. And he's like this, you know. But the juxtaposition of that was as dramatic as I could possibly make it for my audience to understand what we're talking about. This guy who looks like somebody's grandpop is somebody's grandpop who just happens to order people to be killed for a living. And it's over. And here's the funny thing, Nick, and you and I were going to talk about this. Maybe we can smarten up the young squire here. It's almost exclusively, Nick, over money. But when it's not over money, the other thing, and Dan, I hope to smarten you up here. Here's what the other thing is. It's over principle. These guys are very, very principled. Go ahead, Nick.
No, I was going to just say, Angelo Bruno was in power for 30 years.
Yeah.
And he was called the Docile Don, as you may already know, Angelo.
Yes, sir.
Because he avoided violence in any way possible. he was a diplomat, and that's why he lasted so long. And then along came Nicky Scarfo, and he fucked that all up. So
that's an understatement.
Right.
But Dan's wearing the same hat that Angelo Bruno used to wear, but different color.
Exactly. And I had, here you go. By the way.
Yeah, that's it. That's the color.
I have to tell you, Nick, that we have and Dan will tell you, every week I introduce him on the show. I call him the smartest man in the room because I'm contractually obligated. He made me sign a waiver. The other thing I call Dan, I call him the happy haberdasher. This guy's got a hat for literally every night of the week. Every show we do, he hasn't worn the same hat twice. Daniel, go ahead. You and Nick talk a little bit.
Well, you know, it's funny. Angelo's touching on family and principle, and that's obviously something that comes up all the time when you talk about the mob. You know, you got to be good to the family. The family's good to you. You know, the church on Sundays, family dinners with mama. You know, all that. I'm wondering, because you obviously touched on in your writings on the Greek and Irish mob. Other than family, is there anything unique to the Greek and Irish mobs that's their core principle that, you know, like everybody knows with Italians, it's family, it's respect the elders, it's mama. Do the Greek and Irish mobs have a core principle like that?
Oh yeah, it's very similar. I mean, the Greeks they're not very much different than the Italians.
That's true.
In that respect, family is very paramount. Respect for your elders, all that. That's the same idea, pretty much. The only thing is the Greek mob and the Irish, I think, as well. They never really had the structure or pyramid of rankings of who's who. You know, like the Italians did. The Greeks never really did. I mean, they had a boss. They had a couple of lieutenants, if you want to call them that. But there was never there was never some kind of a category.
Speaking of structure, do the Greek and Irish mobs have their own version of a consigliere, or is that specifically an Italian thing?
No, it's just an Italian thing. No.
Nick, I got a question for you because something that Dan just said prompted a question. Is there a difference or a purported public perception of the Greek mob and the so-called gypsy mob, who are often mistaken as Greek? Let's talk about that, because there is this growing number of, and I'll just use the word that they use, gypsy. I don't know if they're Albanian. I don't know what culture a gypsy is, but they're often mistaken as Greek. So can you set the record straight and try to educate us on the power structure of the gypsies?
Well, the gypsies a gypsy is not so much here in America, but in Europe. So a gypsy could really come from any kind of ethnic group, really. It could be Kurdish, could be Iranian, could be Greek, could be, it's mostly Middle Eastern or in that area, even Russian for that sake, Albanian too. So it's a little mix of anything. I mean, we do have Greek gypsies. We do have them. There is such a thing that really came from the Turkey, which is right next to Greece, that country, which I don't care too much about, but that's another story.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I hear you. I hear you on that, brother.
So they kind of came from that area, that section. There's a section called Smyrna, or near in Turkey, which is where a lot of the Greeks that came to Greece were called gypsies because they came from there. Now the Greek mob in general doesn't really exist anymore, especially in America, where they've been broken up by the Italians and by the FBI. They're more prevalent in Greece, but even in Greece, not so much, because they cracked down. They did a mafia crackdown.
Nick, I want to go right there with you. I want to stay on this line of conversation because, again, something you said prompted something here. You said that the Greeks aren't so much the power force structurally as they used to be. That there's really no such thing anymore. But how much of the, for lack of a better word, how much of the Greek mob now has found other ways to make a living? Have they gone cyber? Have they invested in the internet, sports booking, gambling? Dan, we talked about this before.
Yeah,
With the Italians, they're using online gambling as a big, and they're doing it legally.
Right.
Go ahead,
and a lot of online racketeering with the way some online businesses can be run now.
Yeah. I mean, look at the casinos, Nick. Look at the casinos in Atlantic City. All of them have an online internet presence.
Yeah, well,
and you know that they're not all squeaky clean, brother. You know that.
But you're right, Angelo. They did find a way to do it legally, and they do like offshore betting. Mostly they set up lines in Costa Rica. I know a guy who wires them up in Costa Rica, by the way. I'm not going to say his name. But anyway.
No, please don't. I'll have to go into the witness protection.
But I mean, in my book, Mafia Ties, the Greek Syndicates, I do explain in the second chapter how after the Mafia crackdown in 2011 in Greece, how the Greek mob, some of the guys had to find another way to make money.
And that's exactly why I asked you, because I read the book and I was hoping you would mention it. Thank you so much. The book is Mafia Ties. This is the definitive book. If you've not read it, Dan the Man, I encourage you. Get the book Mafia Ties. This is the definitive Greek mob. It's from the inside. You won't put it down. So let's talk about that, Nick. People hear the word mafia, and they immediately associate the Italian with the word mafia.
Right.
Okay. But we hear words like outfit, syndicate, mob, association. We hear that. We hear all these variations, code words for basically mafia. What is in today in 2020, what is the single most powerful tool that the mafia, I'm going to use that as a general term. What is the single greatest tool that the mafia has today in 2020, and how are they using it?
You mean in a way of making money, you mean?
Yes, sir.
Well, you said it earlier. They're not really doing so much with loan sharking, shylocking. They're not really doing too much of that. They may be doing it indiscreetly, but not really. It's more, everything is online. Pornography is huge. They're very big on pornography. Always have been, but more so now.
That's interesting. Yeah, the porn market. That's, you know what, Dan? We didn't even discuss that. The porn market.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought about it. Truth be told.
Liar. You lie, son. You lie.
Well, I mean the mob connection, not the business in general.
Yeah, well, the business has always been somewhat, in some degree, connected. Sonny Francis was the one who was involved with Deep Throat that came out in the 70s.
Yes, absolutely.
Then DB, as we called him, Robert DiBernardo, may he rest in peace, was John Gotti's guy who ran the whole porn business in Manhattan. Then, now it's different generation. So they're finding, the mob in general, they always adapt. They find other ways to make money. If it's not the old school ways, they'll find something else. So they're going to do anything that doesn't, one, draw attention, not one that doesn't make it easy for the FBI to find them or catch them, even though the internet, they can encrypt things. The other concept is that right now there's no social clubs anymore. Those are done. Over. Once you get, it's very hard to find one. I found 3 of them in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn, but they're very discreet. If you didn't know about it, you would never know they're there. Nobody hangs out in the corner no more. John Gotti destroyed all that.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dan, we are at the top of the hour. Before we continue, why don't we have a word from our sponsor, and we will come back from our commercial with more of Nick Christopher's.
Sounds like a plan. You know, we talked the mob taking care of each other, taking care of the boys, and the most important thing you can do, especially with some of the weather we've been having recently, is take care of your own boys. And you can do that with our friends at manscaped.com. Manscaped.com is the world's leading producer and supplier of man trimming products. Their current package has the lawnmower 3.0. Its package includes wipes, the deodorizing spray, or excuse me, the refreshing spray, the deodorizing rub. You go to manscaped.com, use promo code WrestlingFuture for 20% off. They have everything now from the lawnmower 3.0, the weed whacker, which is more for nose and ear trimmer, and obviously anything with a good ball, you got to be some good at whacking it too. So the manscaped.com, use promo code WrestlingFuture, 20% off. That is manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you.
Balls will thank you.
Oh,
and so will we. Now, Nick Christopher's, you got to follow a testicle commercial.
I didn't want to touch that one.
Nothing but the highest standards on this show.
Oh boy.
By the way, I'm gonna move out of the way for a second. I want you to see your sign, Nick. Take a look at it. Really good.
I see it. It's pretty awesome.
Like it?
That's beautiful. Thank you. That's pretty cool. I like that.
Commercial, yeah. And right underneath you.
Yeah, that's pretty nice.
Your happy face. Manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you.
Thank you.
You're quite. I'll send you a copy of that banner so you can, and feel free to use it. Absolutely.
Thank you. Pretty cool.
You're quite welcome. So, Daniel.
Yes, sir.
When last we left off, it is your turn. Go for it, brother.
Well, I mean, it's hard to follow what we were just talking about a second ago, but go back,
sure you'll find a way.
to go back to what we were discussing previously, you were talking about the expansion and the online business. I'm curious with the Greek and Irish mob specifically. Did they have I don't want to say target audience, if that makes any sense? Did they have kind of a target audience the way that the Italian mob does? If you're going to set up sports betting, obviously the Italians, they'll go for, so, you're in New York, New Jersey, you're looking at boxing, you're looking at MMA, whereas maybe with Irish and Greek, you might be looking more at like soccer or sports that are more popular with their target. Do they have a target audience for some of their new endeavors?
Well, no matter what in general, the Greeks really, they had a lot of what they call horse parlors, where you bet on horse racing.
Yeah, that's another big one, Nick. Yeah, off-track betting, sure. The horses. Yeah, that was very big. Not so much now as it was back in the day. Very big back in the day, because horse parlors is where people can go bet on horses in different variations of money, I mean. But another big thing for the Greeks was a game that the Italians could not conceive. It was called Barbut. It's Barbut. It's a Middle Eastern game that the Arabs and the Greeks used to play. And they played with dice and a cup. And that was very huge back in the day. And there's a quote by an Italian guy on Wiretap, Italian wise guy. He says, "We can never master this game. The Greeks would rob us blind," which is true, because the Italians didn't know anything about this game. It was because it's Middle Eastern. Mm-hmm. The Irish, same idea. A lot with gambling, like what I was just mentioning. Especially the gang. There was a gang called the Westies, which was on the west side of Manhattan. Jimmy Coonan he was the boss over there, or the guy, the leader, so to speak. Yeah.
Either one of these groups, Greek, Italian, or Albanian. Well, not Albanian. I'm not going to use them right now. But the Greek and the Irish, like Dan was talking, no matter what project they're looking to do, they had to be clear with the Italians first. It could not run without it. It's not possible, because they had to kick up them.
And that's an interesting point. You mentioned Albanians. Let's talk about John for a second, John Alite. Uh-huh. And by the way, is his name pronounced Alite or Elite? Because we've always been saying Elite.
Elite, that's right.
Okay. Because we were correct at one time. But here's the thing. John could never have been a made man.
Right.
And I am told that frustrated him because he always wanted to be considered a person of respect. He always wanted that badge of honor that comes with being a made guy.
Mm-hmm.
He also wanted the money and the women and everything else that came with being a made guy. You know, pockets full of $100 bills and the whole bit. But he never could because he was not Italian, and a lot of people don't know that. How much did that really frustrate him, and then did that play a part, Nick, in his decision to play ball with the federal government?
Oh, no. That had nothing to do at all. Actually, John was in prison in Brazil because he went on the lam when he knew indictments were coming down. And he was in Europe, and then he ended up in Brazil. Mm-hmm. And when he was in a Brazilian prison, one of the worst prisons in the world, called Aya Franco, one of the worst. And when he was there, he got word that John Jr. Proffered, meaning there was the 302 done because John sat down with the feds, with his attorney.
Yep.
And then another 20 other guys started ratting John Eli out, ratting him out. And then when he came to Florida, when he got extradited to Florida, that's when he got the whole shebang. You know, they told him, listen, we got 30 guys here that testified against you already. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much whether getting made or being a made guy was not the what triggered him to do what he did. And
okay, because I'm sure you're aware that was the story floated around for a while. That was his MO.
No.
Yeah, and that's of course, we hear a lot of things coming through our doors here, but and that's why we have guys like you and George Anastasia come on, because you guys, you have your nose to the grindstone and you know what's happening out there,
Pretty much.
Well, we would rather hear it from the horse's mouth than from some second or third hand source. Daniel,
that actually brings up a kind of bringing us full circle to one of the things we talked about when we first started the interview was your John Gotti's and your big the guys who liked being in front of the camera more than they liked running the business. In your experience, Nick, has the social media age, where everybody in the digital age, everybody walking down the street has a camera, Twitter, Facebook, anybody, and if there's one thing we've seen with your Kardashians and people like that, no matter how talented or important, anybody in the world can become famous now. Has it become easier for some of these upstarts to be big names in the mob, or has it forced them to retreat from the spotlight because it's so much easier to be identified?
Well, any real wise guy who decides to be what they call a computer gangster shouldn't be in the life to begin with, because that's pretty stupid. I'm not even Italian, and I'm Greek, so. I know better than that. No, and John Eli knew better than that when he was out, when he wasn't, when he only got involved with social media because when he got out and he was not involved in that life no more, that's a different story. If you're not involved in the life and you want to get on, you're a civilian now. As far as both of the
Nick, Dan brought up a good point, and I think, Dan, you and I might have had at one point started to broach the subject of using social media as a recruiting tool. I know that you and I spoke on another episode about groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda using Twitter.
Yep.
To where I'm going with this. So why don't you smarten up Nick, enlighten Nick to what some of these groups, how they're recruit. Listen, Nick, you're going to love this. Go ahead, Danny.
Yeah, we touched on that in other discussions, not just on the mob, but in crime and some of the things in general, is organizations like ISIS and Al Qaeda and some of these active extremist groups, even some of the sovereign citizen separationists in America, organizations like the Klan and whatnot, they're able to use social media through two main focus points. One is anybody has an account. Anybody can put stuff out there. Now, I mean, ISIS has a literal official Twitter page. They have a public social media spokesman. That's how they're able to claim, when they do things and, we take credit for this bombing or whatever. But, the other way, they use that to target. They'll go to groups and watch people complain about things like, man, I'm angry at the police, or I'm angry at this. Well, have you thought about, and they'll reach out to people, because in the social media age, anybody with any kind of communication, I can type something in a Facebook page and 10 seconds later, someone in Russia is reading what I just said. That was unheard of 10 years ago. And I'm curious if the mob does something similar, where it's like, man, I'm angry at the police, or I'm angry at the neighborhood. Well, hey, we're like I mentioned earlier with the organization with the Bloods, like, we're looking for somebody to do something for us. A Facebook group is the best place to find that, because like-minded people go together. And by the time the mob would get involved in a Facebook group, half the people on there are, I don't want to say susceptible to radicalization, because that sounds insanely negative, but you pigeonhole yourself. I mean, you look at groups in social media, you're people who believe the earth is flat, and some of these organizations, and they can't. Well, what I mean is I'm using that as an extreme example. Right.
He's not.
I'm using that as an extreme example, because I go to that group and I say, look, here's evidence that you're wrong, and now I'm the villain. So if I'm looking for a particular type of person, the best place to find them is on social media. So
every misfit and malcontent, Nick. That's what Dane is telling you. Every misfit and malcontent is online. That brings me, Daniel, thank you, because you segued me right into where I want to go.
I'm here for
that. Brings me to this, and I think you'll understand it. One of the things that's pervasive in our society today are these extremist groups: the Black Lives Matter, the Purple Lives Matter, the red, white, and blue, hair every Thursday matters. This kind of shit, right? I have this theory that if we nationalized the mafia and gave them full government recognition and accreditation, we could eradicate the national debt. We could bring crime down to like single digits, like 3% crime rate nationally. We could do all this if we let every Galvon and Goodfella have at it and let them do what they do. Because I got news for you. They ain't taking no shit from no Purple Lives Matter, from Black Lives Matter, from red, white, and blue hair every Tuesday matters. They're not. That's where I'm going with this. I think we need to deputize the mafia. What do you say? Are you with me, guys?
That'd be pretty funny. But to mention what Dan was saying earlier about this, recruitment online, the mob would never do that, because you can't do it that way. Because to get inside and to be a made guy anyway in the life, you got to whack somebody first. So you can't whack them online. That's kind of impossible. So that kind of wouldn't work, So recruitment in that fashion, especially now, like I said, a lot of Sicilians are coming here. Mm-hmm. So the guys from the Komodo and the Grata and all those other groups, they don't believe in that kind of stuff. They're still holding on to the traditional way of doing things, so that kind of probably wouldn't really work too well. I mean, you may got some, wannabes, gangsters that want to be in the mob.
Yeah. Oh, there's always wannabes out there, Nick.
There's a ton of wannabes, that may do exactly what Dan said. They may even create their own Facebook page. Hey, guys, you want to join our crew or whatever?
Yeah, but, exactly. Exactly.
And the most they'll probably do is probably steal some of the things that Dan's got behind him.
Yeah, right. Nick, when you wrote Prison Rules, did you get any pushback on that because of the controversial nature of John?
Are you kidding? Definitely. Big time.
That's where, and I know you did, and it's not like a good lawyer. You never ask a question unless you know the answer. So I know you got a lot of pushback. So let's talk about it. What was the focus of most of the negativity?
Well, it came from the John Jr.'s little clique. I got a letter to cease and desist letter, not to finish the book. Yeah. I got hit on Twitter, Facebook, phone calls, emails. What are you doing? Why are you working with this guy? He's a liar. He's a cheater. Blah blah blah. I forget. It was endless. John Jr.'s sister hit me up. One of John Jr.'s little lapdogs, Chris Casparosa, tried to hit me up to change my mind. I told all of them, get the fuck out of here. I'm working on this. Leave me alone. I'm not interested. I mean, I wasn't scared of them or anything. I wasn't worried about nothing because I'm not scared of nobody to begin with. So, and what I was doing, actually, if they paid attention at all, the book's not about John Jr. The book's about how to survive in prison and how to make young people realize this is not the way to go. So it's a book that's geared towards the youth. It's not about John Jr. But these morons thought I was going to glamorize John Elite and make John Jr. look bad, which has nothing to do with it.
Nick, did people try to make the comparison between your book and George's book, Gotti's Rules?
No, it's funny that you say that. Some people are like, oh, is this part 2 of Gotti's Rules? I'm like, no, dummy. There's nothing to do with one another.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. Going off to expand on, and there I am again, expand on this. From what Angela was asking about pushback and feedback.
It's been a long time, Daniel, since you've expanded upon anything. So go ahead. Well, Young Squire, have at it. Nick, we have fun here, Nick.
I'm curious. Did you got negative feedback, people saying, hey, don't do this, don't write this? Did it work the other way too? After the success of books like Prison Rules and some of that, did you have people come to you and say, hey, I saw what you did with John Elite, I have a story to tell you? Have you had that kind of feedback the other way, where instead of telling you to stop writing, people are giving you a chance to write more?
Yeah, well, actually, I got a lot of people that liked the book, people that read it. I had some young people, African Americans, Latinos, who were able to connect with it. Italians as well, white people of all different races that would have approached me and said, this book is great. It helped me. It helped my son. My son's in jail. This is very helpful. Things of that nature, which was good to hear, because if I was able to touch somebody, and me and John were able to make somebody's life a little bit more easier to understand how to deal with the situation, I was happy I can do that.
Nick, you've got a 5th book in you. You're working on it.
Yes.
Without giving too much away, if you're able to, can you talk a little bit about the nature of this book? A teaser, maybe?
Well, I mentioned it a little bit before. The 5th book is I'm doing it along with ex-Colombo family soldier Bill Catolo Jr. Bill Catolo Jr.'s father was Wild Bill Catolo, who was a boss in the Colombo family for a short time, and then an actor. Yeah. He was involved with the war in the early 90s with Carmine Persico.
Yep.
So me and Bill hooked up about a year or two ago. About a year ago or so. And Bill wanted to tell his side of the story, about him, growing up along his father, surviving the war, and then deciding to wear a wire against the people that killed his father. So that's what basically the nutshell of the book is going to be about.
Okay. Now, one other thing here, and then I'll throw back to Dan. I am told that you kind of knew Vinny the Chin. They tell me that you knew Vincent the Chin Gigante.
I never had the pleasure. I wish I did.
Oh man, so that story I'm glad I didn't go there. Okay, so a little birdie told me Ask Nick about the chin, because the guy said, I think Nick knew the chin. So Dan will tell you, the chin has come up on the show a couple of times. He's one of our favorite mob characters.
That
the
he
guy
is.
that was crazy like a fox.
That he was.
Daniel.
Yes,
any
sir.
more questions for Nick? Because we're going to bring him back for part 2.
Oh yeah,
I already told Nick. I said I told him before part 1. I said I'm taking you for part 2. Go ahead, Dan.
No, like I said, having read Prison Rules and enjoyed it, being a former corrections officer myself, I thoroughly enjoyed the narrative, and I liked the way it felt like someone telling a story. So it's been an honor to speak to you, and I look forward to more questions down the road.
Oh, definitely, Dan. It's been fun talking to you too, and everything you got behind you. My son loves those things.
Oh, that's what we do. We started off this show, by the way, Nick, as a professional wrestling show, and that's how we make our bread and butter here. But it's funny because the most popular shows that we do are non-wrestling shows. It's funny. It really is. It's really interesting.
It's actually funny. You mentioned your inspiration for writing was The Outsiders. Just a few weeks ago, your friend was the narrator for the audio version of The Outsiders.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Show's coming together. Look at that.
Look at that.
So I'll tell you what, we are definitely going to bring Nick Christophers back. I got to do part 2 again. We barely scratched the surface. I still got, I've got 2 more books to talk to you about. I got to talk to you about Destinies II, and I got to talk to you more in depth about Mafia Ties, because I barely scratched the surface of that one.
Yeah, I still haven't told. And you mentioned about Vincent the Chin Gigante. I didn't know him. I knew people around. I knew some of the guys around him, and I knew a lot of other guys that I still haven't even mentioned to you yet.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to get into that too. See, this is what I said, and I told, just to let Dan know, I told Nick before we began, I said, we're always going to leave a little teaser to let people know you're coming back, and there's a lot more to talk about. It's like having sex with a really pretty girl. You never want to give her everything you have the first date, because then she won't come back for the second.
Oh man,
It could be
Yeah. So now you butter her up on the first one. Now, when you bring her back for the second one, you can go all the way. Okay, because we're Italian, we don't have no third bases. We just go from first to second.
And us Greeks, we just come from behind.
There you go.
God.
I love this, man. You don't know. I love this, man. Daniel, take us home, kid.
Oh man. Well, this has been a great conversation. We are Wrestling with the Future. We can be found on YouTube, anywhere podcasts can be listened to. We have a Twitter page, Wrestling Future, no G, at Wrestling Future. We're on Instagram, Wrestling with the Future Podcast. We're on Facebook, Wrestling with the Future Podcast fan group. And like I said, we're on anywhere podcasts can be listened to, including several syndicated radio networks and on international television. So we are moving along. And Nick, obviously your books are on Amazon. Nick Christophers, any Google of your search of your name brings up all your writings, and I recommend, having read 2 of them personally, your stuff is amazing. So shout out to you for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's tell Nick that he's welcome back for part 2. We're going to bring him back. The books are the Destinies, Destinies 2, No Honor Among Thieves, Prison Rules, and Mafia Ties, Inside the Greek Mob. Until next time, everybody, take care of yourself, take care of each other. Happy wrestling, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.